Hello everyone, my name is Gabby, and I'm back with another review of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Today we are discussing Season 7, Episode 9, entitled As I Have Always Been. This episode, by far, I think, is one of the best episodes that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has ever put together. Elizabeth Henstridge made her directorial debut and she absolutely crushed it. Drew Greenberg wrote this episode and put together such a freaking amazing script. Kelly Stuyvesant is the one that cut it all together and just made it look absolutely beautiful. And obviously Elizabeth's director's cut helps too. The two of them together, visionaries. I mean, we have a freaking dream team working on this episode, and what they put together was absolute magic. This episode gave me everything that I've ever wanted out of an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode ever, and it was so good. It was emotional. There was funny moments, there was romance, we got lots of Daisy and Coulson moments. I mean, it was just a gift, and I'm so grateful that it turned out so well. I'm so pumped to dive in and discuss it with all of you. You guys should know the drill by now. If you haven't watched the episode yet, go and watch it. I promise you, you are going to love it. But for all of us who have watched the episode, who have sat through this behemoth, let's dive right on in and start discussing it. Spoilers are happening, you have been warned. I'm gonna start out with some general thoughts and then I'll call out specific moments. I feel like this review is gonna be a mess in the way that my review for 707 was, because I just have so many different thoughts and a lot of it is just on these tiny small moments. It's just so hard to organize my thoughts for this review because of the fact that this episode is a time loop. So we have the same scenes repeating over and over again except in different variations. That makes it very difficult to discuss because there's no real streamlined narratives that you can break your review up into and be like, let's talk about this part of the episode and then go to this part of the episode. You can't really do that. You kind of just gotta walk through the entire episode, and that's kind of difficult to do when your thoughts are all over the place, especially in the way that mine are for this episode, because I'm in love with every single moment of it and I can't possibly discuss every single moment, so I have to pick and choose what I think is worth discussing, and I feel like it just kind of makes my review a little bit of a mess. That aside, if my review is like this difficult to structure, I can't even imagine how difficult it had to be to put this whole episode together, from writing it and figuring out how many loops you were gonna do and how you were gonna progress this story, to having to then direct it and look at the script and be like, how am I going to put this together visually, and then having to act it and having to be able to remember at like what point in the loops you're in and what your character's reaction should be to what it is that's going on, and having to do the same parts of the storyline over and over and over again because they did this episode in block shooting, which had to have been really difficult, especially because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't normally shoot in blocks. There's that challenge. Then you have to be able to cut and edit this whole thing together, and it seems like it is such a team effort to be able to get this to come together, and everybody has to be on their A game. All cylinders have to be rolling, and that's absolutely what we got. And I think the crew is such a big part of this episode because there's so many cues and tiny little things that have to work and have to be on time in order for the loops to work correctly, with the sparks and the radiation flare and the audio cues and visual cues and everything in some of those initial first loops that you have to be prepared for as a crew member, and you have to make sure that all of that is in sync. You have to have all of your equipment working. The first day that they started shooting Daisy in the healing pod and waking up for the first time at the beginning of each of these loops, the healing chamber broke, so that's difficult. And I find it so funny how 707, 709, which are two of my favorite episodes of this season, both had technical difficulties that set the episode behind, and they still managed to be like two of the most fantastic freaking episodes this season. I guess in my mind you maybe have to have one thing go wrong for everything else to go right, but either way, I just am so immensely just blown away by this team. And I think this episode was the episode where I really felt it, because there was so much love that all the cast and crew were giving Elizabeth, all of these posts, and it just felt so emotional, and it really started to hit me that the show was coming to an end and that there's just such a beautiful family here, and that everyone feels like such a community, because the show really is a little show that could, and that it's constantly had to resist and persist and really find its own own way and not have to play by any of the rules of the MCU and really get to become its own show. When it was able to do that, it really became this beautiful final product. I'm just so flabbergasted by the depth and the range and the emotion of this episode and how good this show is and how good this 7th season is and how we're just really being given gift on top of gift on top of gift with these really amazing episodes and how there's just such a great team on S.H.I.E.L.D. I feel like I was really feeling it with this episode and I'm so happy with how it turned out. So let's start talking about some of the amazing moments in this episode. We get the title card that repeats in the beginning during the first few loops, which I thought was so clever. And I love the fact that the title cards are normally such a small part of this show and there's been so much detail that has been put into them in this season that now when I go into every single episode, I look forward to the title card and what it's going to look like. And it's something I would have never normally paid attention to. And now I get excited about it, so that's fun. This is so stupid, but I want to talk about it because I need to follow up. I talked about Tattletale in my review for 707 because I thought it was so funny, but I thought it was just a stupid throwaway one-liner. Apparently I was wrong because we come back to it in 709 and Daisy and Simmons make a joke about Deke's horrible 80s cologne and they make a full bottle for it, a full prop. And you don't just get reference to it once, they come back to it again later in the episode and you actually get to see the bottle sitting on the table and you get like a good look at it. Why did we bring this back up again? I thought it was so funny because I wasn't expecting them to ever make reference again to that stupid cologne. But I loved it because any little references and callbacks that we get to the amazingness that was 707 makes my heart very happy. So this episode is amazing for multiple reasons, but we get some really stunning shots that are just excellent camera work. And one of them is this amazing eyeline graphic match cut with Daisy as she's going to hit the button to wake up Coulson. The time loop restarts before she can do that. And so you see the camera like move in on her eyes and then immediately line up with her eyes again as she's waking up in the healing chamber at the beginning of another loop. And we saw this scene in one of the previews before the episode aired and immediately I was in love with it and it was like the first thing to catch my attention and immediately be like, this episode is gonna be something else because that was just so freaking pretty. I just loved that shot. It looked so good and it was cut together perfectly. So thank you, Kelly Stuyvesant, for that. It was a work of art. So then we finally wake up Coulson once Daisy starts to figure out that she's in a time loop and we get to see a very, very early Coulson that felt like a throwback to season 1, season 2, and it made my heart so happy. And some of Clark's best acting, I feel like, came from this episode because he really gets to undercut a lot of the tragic things that are happening in this episode that you normally should be crying over because it's more of an annoyance to him than it is like a legitimate concern, you know? And so getting to see him be super annoyed with Daisy as she wakes him up and he's like, oh great, here we go again. So you figured it out, right? We're in a time loop and you know, every time you die, I have to explain it over and over and over to you again, and we've done this like what, 86 times now, and the shaking of his fist and the throwing of the button and Daisy's reactions of her being like, I died, is so great. It's such a good scene. It's peak comedy. It's just unreal how good that scene was. The second time that I watched it, I just hysterically started laughing. It was great. Because the first time that I watched each of these episodes, I'm watching it with Elizabeth's live stream, so 50% of my attention is going towards the episode and the other 50% is going towards the live stream, so I don't really have much of a visceral reaction to the episode unless something like big happens to catch my attention, because I'm sort of paying attention to the live stream and trying to do both. So the second time that I go and watch the episode is when I'm really getting to enjoy all of the moments because I have nothing else distracting me. And oh, that scene was just so good. So then Daisy and Coulson spend a while trying to figure out how to fix the time loops and try to solve the time loops. Deke ends up talking to Simmons about the implant and how if they were to take out the implant, she would probably know how to fix the time drive to allow them to be able to jump and get out of the time storm before they all die. And Daisy and Coulson immediately overhear them talking and are like, there's an implant, there's a secret that you're keeping from us. And Deke immediately gets defensive and is like, I did not tell them, you followed me. And I just feel so bad for his character at this point because he's trying so hard to keep the secret. Simmons told him not to tell anybody anybody, doesn't want to tell anyone, he wants to keep the secret, and the fact that Daisy and Coulson know and find out upsets him. And I just feel so bad because he's constantly thrown under the bus for like every tiny little thing that he does wrong, and he's genuinely trying this time to keep Simmons secret. Even that fails him. It's just... So then we get this beautiful word, this beautiful line, phlebotinum, which is so ridiculously funny, but I love it because of the first delivery of the line, because we get to hear this word multiple times in the episode. And Daisy just delivering it very annoyed, being like, I've done this before, and Simmons being all cute about it is so good. It's such a fun word, and especially because it's a writer's room word. I loved getting to hear the backstory behind that word. It's so fun, and I love the fact that the writer's room gets to have their own little words, and there's little things that they put in the episode that we may not understand unless we're directly told what it means, and that they get to, you know, have their own little Easter eggs and hidden things in the episodes. It's really cool. Then we get to the emotional part of this episode, and Simmons and Daisy die. They end up inhaling poisonous gas and die. Simmons dies the first time, and then Daisy goes in with her the second time and dies. Deke having to watch both of them die is absolutely the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. I know that he's not going to remember seeing them die, and that it, like, for the, like, sake of things, might as well have not actually happened. Oh my god. And Jeff's reaction, the tears in his eyes, I mean, all of that, like, that whole little portion of the episode was, like, peak acting. And the thing that makes it so great is once Daisy dies and we get to that second loop of this little portion of the episode, we get Deke who's in tears and is like freaking out. We have Enoch who's being like, they're dead. Somebody probably tried to kill them. And Coulson just being like, what a pain in the ass. Because now Daisy has to do the loop all over again and refigure out everything that's happening and wake up Coulson. And, you know, he doesn't have time for that. And his annoyance is just such great peak comedy. And like the differing reactions, it's just such like an emotional roller coaster at that point, because you have three different characters that are reacting in such contradictory ways to what it is that's going on, and it's amazing. It's just unreal. I have to talk about this moment because now that I have more information about it, I find it even funnier. We get to see Daisy, Coulson, and Sousa interrogating Gemma, Deke, and Enoch about the poisonous gas and someone being willing to kill to keep Diana inside of Gemma. And immediately all the suspicions go to Deke and Enoch, and for some reason I was really thinking that it would be Deke. I can't tell you why. And I was also thinking about some of the like behind the scenes pictures and like images that were released ahead of the episode that were maybe like taken while the episode was being filmed or released now, which like obviously all of the pictures were taken. That I don't know why I needed to say that, but there was one of him like with a scratch on his face. I'll put it here for all of you to look at, and we'll talk about this image a little bit more in a few minutes. I saw that and I was like, he's gonna have to get into a fight, or there's gonna be something that happens for him to have to get that injury, and I was thinking, oh, maybe him and Daisy have a fight and battle it out because of this, and I just sort of hadn't thought that it was gonna go there. Obviously that's not what ends up happening, and we get to see evil Enoch, which we will talk about a little bit later on because I have a few other things to address before we get to that scene in the episode. Instead, what we get to end this scene is this really great moment of Deke and Enoch just looking at each other, just being like, did you do it? Did I do it? Like, just like, like being like so suspicious of each other. And it was so funny, and it makes me sad that there are versions of this scene where they do like a double take and a triple take. I just wish we could have seen that scene, because could you imagine how funny it would have been if they did it once and then did it twice and then a third time? We need to release the Enoch Deke cut. Now I'm just gone. I'm just absolutely lost it thinking about that. Oh, that's great. So we get to see the spoiler goggles next. You do not know what those are. Elizabeth put a picture up on her Instagram story of Jed Whedon wearing these goggles, and she added text to her Instagram story post saying mild spoiler for 709, and everyone was looking at that photo being like, what is she spoiling? The minute that I saw Coulson wearing those goggles, I was like, they're the goggles, like they're the spoiler goggles. And so that's what I call them now. This scene is so great. Coulson is trying to free Yo-Yo from the Quinjet because his thought is that she can take Simmons' implant out quickly enough before anybody comes in and tries to kill Daisy for Simmons or any other member of the team before the next time loop restarts, because she's also fast enough to be able to do it. They're thinking, you know, she'll be a good resource. And he just gets her out. Like, he finishes getting her out just as you see the lights flicker and the time loop about to restart, and he just says, son of a bitch, before it transitions to phlebotinum. And it's such a good cut. I think one of the things that I started to notice with this episode is that Elizabeth paid particular attention to how she began and ended each scene so that all of these different loops could transition into each other quite nicely. And I don't think I normally pay attention to scene beginners or enders in the episode much, because it just all feels like one nice cohesive storyline to me. But this time it's very different because you have all these different repeating sequences and events. So I can tell that there was a lot of concern and detail that was put in to making that decision of how each scene begins and ends. And I think Elizabeth talked a little bit about it. So it's definitely one of the reasons why I noticed it a little bit more as well. And I think she did such a good job with that, because each scene begins and ends so nicely, and it's just such beautiful storytelling, and the episode really flows, and it could absolutely be a choppy mess in the hands of anybody else. So then we see Sousa sacrificing himself, and that catches Daisy off guard a little bit. I'm starting to be like, ooh, Daisy Sousa, whoa is happening? We're getting breadcrumbs. We're gonna talk more about this once we get to the scene. You know the scene I'm talking about. But wow, I think Sousa is also a really smart strategist, and he recognizes the fact that Daisy can't be the one to sacrifice herself, because then she'll forget everything and have to relearn, and they don't have time for that. So he just goes and grabs the weapon, and I think it stabs him or something, and he just starts choking on his own blood. Daisy immediately is just like shouting, like having to watch him die, and it's just horrible, but really kind of endearing that he'd be willing to do that. So then this episode transitions to another really beautiful moment of Coulson being upset about his team members being killed and having to watch it with each loop, having to watch Daisy die and having to watch Simmons die and Sousa die. These people are his family, and it is now permanently burned into his memory. And just how horrifying that is, and not knowing who's responsible for all of these deaths, and also just hating himself a little bit because he sees himself as a machine and programming, and that when they do get out of the time loop and out of the time storm and they go back to their normal lives, that at some point he's going to have to watch the rest of his team members die off while he's essentially immortal and is not going to be able to stop it. There's nothing he can do. And how unnatural all this is, and how he didn't ask for it, and how somebody else made the decision for him. This conversation, I think, is really brilliant, and I think it's a very natural one to have, because Coulson was immediately insistent in like season 5, very like early seasons, I do not want to be brought back. I want to die, and I want to stay dead, because I've already gone through all of that, and it's not normal. I don't want that. Naturally, his response at having to be brought back would be like, I never wanted any of this. And getting to see him go through all of that is just really emotional. And that's one of the beautiful things about Clark Gregg, is he can, in one episode, have a scene where he's very annoyed and agitated, and it's very comedic and just like brilliant delivery, and then he can do something that's really emotional and really hits you and makes you feel all of the things, and he's doing that in the span of one episode. It's just amazing how many twists and turns and tone shifts this episode takes, and how each of the actors is just able to give the performance that they need to fit the tone of that scene. Both Chloe and Clark just absolutely kill it in this episode with all of the different moments that they have, and make each one so special and so perfect. So this conversation that Coulson has with Daisy about his own lack of humanity, like feeling like he doesn't have a soul, all of this that's brilliant, leads him to realize that Enoch is the one that is trying to kill all the team members, because his programming prohibits him from allowing Diana to be removed, because Gemma and Fitz programmed it that way in order to keep both of them safe. Daisy immediately tries to test this theory, and Enoch starts strangling her, and Deke freaks out, and Gemma freaks out. Joel Stauffer, who plays Enoch, has this brilliant delivery about how I will kill whoever it takes to keep the implant in, even you, Gemma Simmons, and Daisy immediately quakes him back, and then he realizes, and he's like, oh no. And that whole little section, so good. And one of the things that I was really happy about that scene is that we get to see Daisy use her Quake Powers. So we get confirmation that she still has them because we haven't seen her use them in like 4 episodes, something like that. So it's good to see that and know that she's good because we're gonna need those as we get into some of the final episodes of the season. So then we go to this portion of the time loop where the team is trying to outsmart Enoch. First, they enlist Sousa to help, and his distraction about mealtime is some of the most boring and just horrible method of distraction I've ever seen, but it's so funny. The fact that Enoch is immediately realizing that Sousa is trying to stall him and ties him up and then just like throws him and then just throws Daisy against the wall. Like that escalated so quickly. So then Daisy and Coulson decided let's do a more direct approach, and then that doesn't work, and they have this joke about them being like, oh, you'll see the irony in it, and then the scene immediately cutting to he did not see the irony as both of them are leaning against that motorcycle. So good. Then we get the whole team to assemble and they're like, okay, we're gonna need everyone, and you have Mac show up and being like, Enoch, we need to talk, and then the scene cuts again to all of them like just laying on the floor because Enoch is apparently a super machine when he's programmed to try to keep Diana in, and he had weapons apparently too. I was like, what the hell did this fight sequence look like for all of them to go down like this? Even worse, this cursed image, this cursed frame of Deke Shaw in the foreground, just with like blood all over his face. And they make a joke about him dying. I think May asks if Deke is dead, and then Mac responds with, do we need to be sad about that? And Daisy says, we do not. And obviously the time loop starts all over again. And like, well, I get that like he's not actually dead, so it's not the end of the world. We don't really need to mourn him. The fact that there's no, like it's just a joke is very upsetting to me because why is it that Deke always has to be the blunt in all of the jokes? There's a part of me that wants to be upset about this, but then there's another part of me that's like, you know what? You want to make him the blunt of all your jokes? Fine, but keep him alive. That's all I ask. So I don't want to ever see anything like that scene again. We don't need Deke to die anymore. You joked about his death, so you don't get to kill him. You know, those are the rules. I don't make them. I just enforce them. Let's not do that again. Let's not. And the thing that made me even more mad about this is that this image, the one that I was talking about earlier that I was freaked out about, was all for a joke. It was all for a gag. It wasn't even an actual legitimate fight sequence. Like, are you kidding me? I was so unbelievably frustrated because I spent 2 weeks freaking out about this cursed image for a joke. Unbelievable. Moving on, let's talk about something a little bit more lighthearted. Let's talk about Doozy, Daisy, and Sousa. Oh my goodness. So we get this beautiful conversation between Daisy and Sousa where Daisy asks like, what is up with you? What do you want? You never question anything I tell you. You have no reaction and you're always willing to help me. No questions asked. Why? Why do you care? She's genuinely confused, and Sousa has this brilliant little section of dialogue about how some of his favorite people are people like Daisy, how they will refuse to lose, even if that means like throwing themselves into a brick wall. He wants to be there to pick her back up when she falls. Like, I'm doing such a horrible job paraphrasing this little section of dialogue, but you heard it, you listened to it, you knew how beautiful it was. And then we get to the next loop and Daisy wakes up and asks Sousa for help, and he's immediately like, what can I do to help? And she sort of like hesitates for a second and then kisses him and then kisses him again. My reaction when I first watched this live, like I slammed my hand on the table that was next to me and immediately just screamed no. And it wasn't because I didn't want to see it, but it was because I was just so shocked. The no of no way rather than a no of like, no, I don't like this. Although, you know, I was sad to see all hopes of Deke Daisy ever happening dying. Although I just don't think they worked very well for each other, because now my realization as we're getting this kiss for the first time is that Sousa in Daisy is a lot more simple, and it kind of reminds me a lot of Katniss and Peeta, because Katniss is this fire and Peeta is very simple, very easy, and very good, whereas Gale is like not good for Katniss at all, and sort of the way that Deke isn't good for Daisy at all. And it made sense to me because Sousa is just never gonna say no. Like, he's just that simple and good and lovely, and the fact that he appreciates strong women, I think I fell in love with Sousa and had a whole new level of respect for him. He is such a great character, and I love what they're doing with him in this season. I'm all on board. I'm here for it. And the fact that Elizabeth got to direct their first kiss, I'm all here for all of this. The team finally gets Gemma's implant out, and Gemma tells them that Enoch is the key to solving the time loop. There's a component inside of him that can be used to help fix the time machine and allow them to jump and stop experiencing the loops. Oh, this scene, I mean, Elizabeth Henstridge is a boss woman. She is literally directing this episode as she's doing this incredibly emotional scene where she has to just start sobbing whole tears and have this meltdown and whatever the hell it is that she's remembering from having her implant removed, which, like, my God, when we actually find out what the hell was going on there and what it was she was remembering, it's gonna be over for all of us. And Deke having to watch Gemma freak out, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, the power Elizabeth Henstridge has. I mean, oh my God. And I found it even funnier that Jeff and Chloe were making fun of her during the live that they were doing, where they were talking about how she just did one take for each coverage and was just like, bam, action, cry, boom, cut. Let's do it again for the other side. Action, cry, boom, done, cut. Like, oh my God. I can't imagine like being in the room watching that happen, watching her direct herself as she's having to act and do this really emotional scene. I mean, that takes talent. It's talent is what Elizabeth Henstridge has. I mean, my God. So then we get the end of this episode, which is so devastating. It's unreal how good the writing is. Drew Greenberg crushed it with the writing for this episode, but this part in particular is like really a gun punch because it's so beautiful and sincere, and it's like 5 to 9 pages worth of just dialogue, and it's a very still, quiet moment of getting to just stay with Enoch in his final moments. Daisy gathers Enoch, Deke, and Gemma, Coulson, and herself into the LMD lab and tells them that in order for them to be able to get out of the time loop, Enoch basically has to sacrifice himself. Both Gemma and Deke resist this, mainly Gemma, and while they're having this back and forth, Enoch immediately pulls the component out of him and is like, this is what you need. And he says that Fitz would willingly sacrifice himself for Enoch as he believes the rest of the team would, and so he willingly does it. After a little bit of just like, we can't believe that just happened, Gemma and Deke take the component, start to fix it. Deke doesn't want to talk about it, so I don't even want to know how this is going to affect Deke, what stupid things he's going to do in response to this, because I'm still standing by my stupid, heroic, idiot, sacrificing himself comments because we're not out of the woods yet there, so we'll see what happens. But we get the rest of this episode, which is this brilliant monologue that Joel just does such a brilliant job delivering. Joel Stauffer. Oh my God. I almost feel bad because I feel like I jinxed this, because in some of my earlier reviews I talked about like, I feel like Enoch is suspicious and I don't know where his storyline's gonna go. I'm gonna be interested to see what they do with him. And I mean, I was kind of right about him being suspicious with the whole evil Enoch thing. Not gonna say I called it, because that definitely was not what I was thinking in terms of how that was gonna all play out. But I didn't expect him to die. Like, I didn't ask for that either, writers. The conversation that he has with Daisy and Coulson about being alone and how he spent thousands of years on the earth alone and he never felt lonely, but the minute that he met this team when he was alone, he started to feel lonely for the first time, and now as he's thinking about dying, he's gonna have to be alone and he's wondering if he's gonna feel lonely. And with Coulson having experienced death himself, he talks about how in that final moment, yeah, you do feel loneliness, it's a little bit natural, but it's fleeting and it's gone. The people who experience the real loneliness are the people who have to go on without you. And it almost feels like a really great callback to that earlier conversation that Coulson and Daisy were having, his way of saying like, I recognize what it is you had to go through and how horrible it was. Sort of like leveling the playing field, and both of them having very valid concerns as to Coulson's mortality or immortality or whatever it is going on with him, while also like recognizing what it is that Enoch is going through and how horrible it is that he's having to experience all of this after thousands of years being alive. You know, when you think you're immortal, you just don't think you're ever going to die, and so actually having to confront death must be terrifying after having been alive for that long. And what makes this whole monologue worse and had me in tears by the end of it is that The monologue starts off with comments about Fitz, and it ends with comments about Fitz. It begins and ends with Fitz. I mean, and it makes me even more mad that Fitz wasn't there with him at the end, because that's just cruel. He says Fitz, and Daisy says, like, you were such a good friend to him as you were to all of us. And his last freaking words were, as I have always been. And he doesn't even get to finish the phrase. But the episode is titled after his final words. I literally, like, when I figured that out and put that all together, I wanted to just, like, run into a brick wall. I just was feeling all the things, and after that, like, roller coaster of an emotional episode, that was not what I was I was just speechless. I was just so moved. So then we get this prediction in the middle of this monologue. So not only is it incredibly moving and philosophical, it also has relevance to the bigger plot. And I believe I have Enoch's exact words. He says, while your friends indeed will survive, the team will not. I have seen the future. And he talks about this mission being their last mission. And it seems like he's referencing whatever the hell happens in the finale, whatever that is. And I don't know whether to feel relieved by this or very worried, because he says your friends will indeed survive. But does that mean that they'll just survive like the time loop? Or they will all be alive by the end of the season? Because I would like to hope that it is the latter and that everyone lives to the end of the season. That would be great. But then why would the team not survive? Is it just because they all retire and go in their different directions? That was my immediate thought. But I'm like, what if whatever time travel things they change makes sure the team was never formed, and then none of them actually remember each other, or something really horrible and messed up like that? I don't want to think about the implications of that. And now it's all I'm going to be thinking about. So that's great. Oh, Joel Stauffer absolutely killed it this episode. He made this episode his bitch, and he just crushed it. He was amazing. And it's so mind-boggling to me that he just started out as this voice at the end of season 4, and then he suddenly became a whole character with this persona, and he became this friend to the team who is just unwavering in his loyalty, and is just so good and fun and quirky and has some of the best lines, and I'm gonna miss his character so much. And I don't think it really hit me until I watched this episode how great of a character he was. And I know that, like, I was starting to question him a little bit, but like, oh, now that this is what we've got, like, I just he was such a good character, and I'm so sad to see him go. So this isn't exactly a shot glass, but it's the closest thing that I could find at the moment while I was filming. So I figured I might as well do this, because why not? And I feel like I may do this again as we get to the end of the season. But Spy's goodbye to Enoch. You were a loyal friend to the team, and you made this season really special. Joel, thank you for everything that you did for the show, and for being such a wonderful person and giving us such a great, nuanced, interesting character. Cheers. Okay, I think that's about it for my thoughts on this episode. I mean, I barely even scratched the surface with how good this episode was and how many amazing moments there were. Everybody just really stepped it up for this episode and made it something so special. I think this one is definitely going to stick with me for a while. I am so proud of Elizabeth and all of the amazing work that she did on this episode, and it's just so inspiring to me to see her start out in season 1 and then step up to the plate and spend all of these years shadowing directors, asking questions, being inquisitive, and then being able to see like where that gets her. And I cannot wait to see what other projects she directs. To everyone that put this episode together, which had to have been such a difficult episode to film, thank you for all of the work that you did. Clark and Chloe were amazing. Joel was amazing. I mean, the entire cast absolutely crushed it. And Drew Greenberg's writing was phenomenal. This is one of like the best scripts I have seen in a very, very long time, and the crew that had to work with all the different time loops and having to get all the cues correct. This really was a team effort, and everybody just crushed it. It was so special to watch and get to share with the cast. I just have no words. I'm speechless. This episode is amazing. So if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching. Lemons to all of you, and I'll see you next time in a new one. Goodbye!